Share and NTFS permission assignment. So we've got Windows XP installed and it's running well, but we have some files or applications that we'd like to give other people access to, either locally or remotely. We can create shares to give access to our files across the network, and then we can use NTFS permissions to restrict the level of access that we want to allow to these files or applications, which is what the focus of this video is going to be. So let's talk about this a little further here. We're going to start off by seeing how we can share folders on our computer, and also how we can connect to other computers on our network and share folders on remote computers, and the share permissions that we can apply to these share folders. Best practice though is to secure our files and share folders and other files by using NTFS permissions, and we'll see how we can automatically and manually assign our NTFS permissions, and look at some new features in Windows XP to help us sort out what permissions a user actually has when they're a member of multiple groups. And then we'll finish off by seeing how we can take ownership of files that have been assigned NTFS permissions. So let's kick this off by seeing how we can create a shared folder locally on our computer. Let's create and share a folder on one of our partitions. We're going to do that by opening up My Computer. So we're going to click on Start. Click on My Computer. Let's go to our E partition, and we're going to create a new folder by right-clicking, choose New, select Folder. And in Windows XP we have two methods that we can use to share a folder. First off, you'd select the folder you want to share, and then on the left-hand side we have a task called Share This Folder. If we click on this, that automatically takes us to the Sharing tab. So that's our first method that we can use to share a folder. Let's cancel out of here. The second method is we can share the folder by right-clicking on it, and from this little flyout menu we can choose Sharing and Security, and that brings us to the same location that the share this folder task brought us to. So we've got two methods in Windows XP to share this puppy. When we share this folder, what we're doing is creating an access point through which other people can enter to access the resources that we placed in the folder. The resources would be files or other folders, or maybe even other applications. Another way to look at this is that we're essentially creating a door to a room to let people access the contents of this room and only this room. We're not, by creating a share, that does not mean that people can access the entire computer. So let's click on Share This Folder. As a default, the share name is the same as the folder name. We can change the share name just by typing in something here. We could add a little comment about what resources are inside the SharePoint. And the user limit option allows us to determine how many users can simultaneously connect to this SharePoint. In Windows XP Professional, the maximum of 10 users can connect to this folder simultaneously, or we can use the allow this number of users option to determine manually how many users can connect to the shared folder. So the maximum of 10, or we can notch this down to a lower number if we so choose. When we create a shared folder, the default permission is everyone full control, and we can see that by clicking on the permissions button. So we see the everyone group means that every person has the ability to access the SharePoint, and because they have the full control permission, that means they can open and read files, they can delete files, they can delete folders, they can change permissions. And that sounds pretty drastic, but actually we're going to leave the permission at everyone full control, and we're going to lock down access to the files and folders that we have in this SharePoint by using NTFS permissions. Let's close out of here and just talk about that for a sec. And we'll click on OK to finish this off. And now we've got our brand new shared folder, and we see the little hand underneath the folder. It's kind of like the Allstate helper hand. I'm sharing this folder to you and handing it to you. Now let's bring up a little whiteboard here to talk about why we should use NTFS permissions to lock things down. So remember, the point of a shared folder is just simply to provide an access point to resources. So let's draw out a little share folder right here. Just call this share. And let's say inside the shared folder we've got some other files and some other folders. We've got some data right here. So we've just provided this door that people can enter through to access all these different resources that we have here. And the share permissions that we apply on this door will also apply to all the files and folders within the door, but we can only apply the permissions to the shared folder itself. We can't apply the permissions individually to the different resources that we have within the shared folder. In contrast, if we formatted the partition or the volume with the NTFS file system, we can use NTFS permissions to apply permissions directly to files or folders at a more granular level than our share permissions can. So if this was a Word document right here, I could assign the Everyone group read permission, and then for this Excel spreadsheet I could assign everyone full control and have different permissions for each of my resources within this folder. Now when you combine the share permissions with the NTFS permissions, the most restrictive of the two will win out. So for example, if I leave the default share permission, let's just draw this out here, I'll say share is at the default of full control. But then within the share we'll use the NTFS permission of let's say for example just read, which will allow people to, we'll say read and execute, allow people to open up the Word documents and be able to read what's in that Word document, but they can't modify the document in any way, form, or fashion. So we've got these conflicting permissions here. The share is full control, NTFS is just read. But when we combine the two permissions together, the most restrictive of the two is the permission that's going to win out. So in this case, the read permission is the most restrictive. So the end result is the user that's accessing the files will have read and execute. So we don't have to worry about this full control now. We'll use the NTFS permissions to assign at a granular level exactly what permissions our users or groups of users should have by using NTFS permissions. So the easiest way to avoid conflicts when you're combining these NTFS permissions and share permissions is leave the door open. Leave the door with full control and then just modify the individual files and folders using our NTFS permissions, because we can easily create conflicts between our NTFS permissions and our share permissions if share is more restrictive and NTFS is a little looser. So leave the door open. And let me give you another example of this. I had stayed at a hotel in San Jose a couple years back, and the hotel room is my SharePoint, and my hotel room door is everyone full control. I can go in the door anytime I want, no problem. But when I entered that SharePoint, that hotel room door, and went into my room, I found that the remote control for the TV was bolted to the nightstand. I kid you not. So that the bolt to that remote control was my read, execute, NTFS permission. I could use that remote control, but I couldn't take that remote control and put it in my pocket and bring it out of the hotel room with me. So we're leaving the hotel room door at full control, but we're bolting down the furniture with our NTFS permissions. The only time you're really going to be using share permissions to control access to resources is when you haven't formatted with NTFS, that you've just used FAT or FAT32. So let's close out of here now and see how we can create a SharePoint not only on our computer but on other computers in our network by using our computer management console. And we can access that console by clicking on Start, select My Computer, right click My Computer, and then choose Manage, and that's going to fire up our computer management console. The computer management console has a handy feature called Shared Folders, which will allow us to see all the shared folders that have been created on our machine. So if we click on Shares, we see the share that we just created a second ago. If you notice up at the top here, it says Computer Management parentheses Local. So that means the focus of this tool is right now on our computer. Well, we can change the focus of the tool from our computer to a remote computer by selecting Computer Management, right click, and then choose Connect to another computer. So at this point you type in the name of the other computer or browse to it. So let's click on the Browse button, and we can click on Advanced and just click on Find Now, and that will display all of our computers. Here's one called DC Nuggets. Click on OK, and then click on OK, and then click on OK. And now if you notice, the focus has changed from local to this computer called DC Nuggets in this domain called nuggetlab.com. Now that we're connected to this computer, we can view the shares on that computer by expanding System Tools, then expand Shares, and then click on Shares so we can see all the shares on that computer. But additionally, we can remotely create shares on that computer by right-clicking on the shares and then choose New File Share. From this dialog box, we can share an existing folder, or we can create another folder and share the folder we create. So we can click on the Browse button and find a folder that's on this computer that we'd like to share by expanding either the C partition or the E partition. So if we wanted to share the data folder, we could do that, or we could click on the Make New Folder button and make a new folder at this point and share that. Let's just share this existing folder called Data and click on OK. And what would we like the share name to be? We'll just call it Data as well, and click on Next. And then from this dialog box we can adjust all of the share permissions. The default share permission is everyone full control, or we have a couple of other options here: administrator full control, users read, administrator full control, users have no access, or we can click on the customize button and choose the users and groups that we would like to provide share permissions to. So let's click on cancel, just say everyone full control, and then click on finish. And do I want to create another share right now? No, thank you. And so if we go back into our computer management console, and we'll just refresh the screen. Oh, it's already there. On the right hand side we see the Data SharePoint. And I was able to remotely connect to DC Nuggets because I've logged on as an administrator. You have to make sure you have the right username and password to remotely connect to the computer that you want to create a share on. If you notice here also, there's shares called $C$ and E$. Those are called administrative share points. Let's talk about those for a second. We'll close out of here, go back to our E partition, and let's just go up one level and take a look at the properties of our E partition. Right click, choose Properties, and we'll click on the Sharing tab. And if we notice here, it says this folder has already been shared. Well, it's not really a folder, it's our entire E partition, but it's been shared with this name E$. This does not mean that we're sharing our entire E partition for everybody to see and access. The administrative SharePoint allows people who log on as an administrator to access the entire partition, and that's typically done for administrative purposes. So as a default, every partition on NT-based operating systems will have an administrative SharePoint. And if we close out of here, we can demonstrate this by clicking on Start and then click on Run, and then access the administrative SharePoint on DC Nuggets. So let's do that now by typing in DC Nuggets, and we're going to access the administrative SharePoint on the C partition. So we type in C and then $, and because I've logged on as a domain administrator to this computer, I should be able to access the administrative SharePoint on this computer, DC Nuggets. So let's test that out by clicking on OK. And here we go. So if you notice in the address bar, it says that I'm now connected to DC Nuggets, and I see basically the entire C partition. It's laid bare before me. I can create files, delete files, move files, copy files, do whatever I want. So having said that, be very careful as to which users you add to your administrators group. So that covers the 1, 2, 3s of creating shares. Let's close out of here and see how we can lock down the files and folders within our shares and other files and folders locally on our computer using NTFS permissions. For that, let's go back to our E partition. So let's open up the SharePoint that we just created and add a file in here. So we'll just double click, and let's create new text document gives us something to work with here. Let's call this test. Being real original here. Now let's take a look at the default permissions of this document we've created by right-clicking on the document, choose Properties, and then click on the Security tab. The Security tab displays the Discretionary Access Control List, or DACL for short, and the DACL just simply shows us the users and groups that are allowed or denied access to this particular document. So in Windows XP we see as a default members of the administrators group, the system group, the user that created the file or folder, and members of the user group all have varying levels of access to the object that was created, the object being the file or folder. The administrator's account as a default has full control permissions. The system group, which is essentially your system account, which is used by the operating system typically to run services, but it can also access files, also has full control permission. The user that created the actual object, in this case the user account training created this file, also has full control permission. And members of the users group, either local or domain users, just have the ability to open up the file, read the file, but they can't modify the file. They just have read, execute, and read permission. The full control permission allows the user to change permissions, take ownership of the file or folder, be able to create new files, delete files. Basically, you have full control. Whereas the modify permission allows the user to delete a folder and also gives them the same permissions associated with write. So if I click on modify, that automatically selects write. And the write permission allows the user to create new files, create new folders, allows the user to view folder and file ownership and permissions. The read permission allows the user to see files and folders, but in order to actually read the contents of the document and to double click on the document and open it up in the application, we need the read and execute permission. And the execute portion allows the user to actually run the application to read the document. The write permission we talked about, and then we can assign special permissions as well at a very granular level. And these permissions can be set to either allow or deny. It's pretty straightforward. If you set to allow, the person has those permissions. If you set to deny, the person does not have those permissions. Also, any users or groups that are not on this list are automatically denied access simply due to the fact that they're not on the list. Oftentimes, these permissions that we see below here, full control and modify, are really a collection of permissions called access control entries. And these can be viewed by clicking on the Advanced button. And then from here, if we wanted to see the access control entries for full control, we would select full control and then click on the Edit button. And from here, we see the permissions entry and dialog box. And here we see all the individual access control entries which comprise the full control permission. So we see those kind of in gray on the left-hand side here. So you go to this dialog box to see all the individual permissions that make up full control, modify, read and execute, or read permission, and all the special permissions that you can assign from this dialog box as well. Let's close out of here and go to our previous dialog box. And this table area here is pretty important. We have several columns here. The first column shows us whether or not we've been allowed the permission or denied a permission, shows us the users or groups that have a permission and what type of permission. And then the inherited from column shows us where did we actually get our permissions from. And we see not inherited and from the parent object. Well, when we first created the file, I said that as a default we get certain permissions. Users have certain permissions. The system account, the users group, etc., etc. Well, how did they get permission as a default? Well, the answer to that question is right here. They've inherited those permissions from a parent object. What do I mean by parent object? Well, let's close out here and take a look at this. So administrators, system, and users all had permission as a default because they've inherited those permissions from a parent. And we can find out what the parent is by closing out of here. And I'm just going to use my tab key to close out. Okay, right now this file that we've created is referred to as a child, and the folder in which this file is located in, the new folder, is referred to as a parent. So what has happened is that this child has inherited these permissions from the parent folder. So if we go up one level and take a look at the properties of this new folder that we've created by right-clicking, choose Properties, then click on Security, we see some permissions that have been assigned here. The permissions that we see on the folder were automatically inherited by the file that we created within the folder. And you can tell if a permission has been inherited just by looking under the Allow or Deny column to see if the actual checkbox is grayed out as it is right here. You can assign permissions in one of two ways: explicitly or implicitly. Implicitly means that the permission has been inherited, and you know you have an inherited or an implicit permission if the checkbox is grayed out. If I choose Deny and click on that, that's an explicit permission. When you've manually came in here and added a user or added a group, and you've manually chosen which permission, either allow or deny, that you want to choose. That's explicit. This is implicit, or also called inherited. But the question remains is, where did the folder inherit these permissions from? Well, to answer that question, we just have to find the parent for the folder. And in this situation, the parent for the folder, if we go up one level, is the actual E partition. So let's go up one level, take a look at the properties of our E partition. So we're just going to right-click, choose Properties, and let's go to the Security tab. And from here we see the same administrators group, the same system, and same users. However, the one thing that's different is when I click on these options, you see here that these permissions have been explicitly assigned by the operating system. So what's happening is, if we choose the administrators group as an example, is that anything created on this E partition, any file or folder, will inherit these permissions that you see right here. So the child object is always inheriting the permissions from the parent object. And let's put that to test. Let's close out of here. We'll just click on OK. And let's go back to our folder. And let's add a group onto our folder. So we'll just right click, choose Property, go to our Security tab. And from here, let's just click on Add. Let's add in a group called, how about Sales Group? And then click on OK. So now that I've manually added in a group, it's explicitly assigned these permissions as a default. Just allow the user to open up the file and read the contents of the file. If we wanted to allow the user to modify the file and edit the file, we'd have to choose Modify, which automatically assigns write permission as well. Let's just leave that off for the time being and click on Okie dokie. So now the file within this folder should have inherited that sales group. So let's put that to the test by opening up the folder, select the file, right click, Properties, go to the Security tab, and here we go. We see the sales group, and if we look underneath the permissions, we see that we've inherited the read, execute, and read permission from the parent, which was our new folder. The advantage to using inheritance is that if you have a folder with many subfolders within it and many files within that folder, and you want to change the permission to the parent folder and have those same permissions applied to every single file and folder within that parent folder, the inheritance will take care of that and automatically assign that same permission to every single file and folder. However, you can disable the inheritance feature on a file or a folder at any level just by clicking on the Advanced button, and then from here just deselect Inherit from Parent. But before we do that, I'd like to point out that this dialog box shows us very clearly where we've inherited our access control entries from. So we see here this sales group and its permission was inherited directly from the folder, but administrators, training, system, and users, it's a little convoluted. It's saying that we've inherited those access control entries from the E partition. What actually happened is that those permissions, those entries, came from the partition. They flowed through the folder to the file within the folder. And to turn off this inheritance monkey business, we just have to deselect this, and it's going to ask us, what do you want to do with everything that you had inherited? Do you want to retain it by clicking on the copy button, or do you want to remove everything? Well, let's go for the gusto and just click on remove. And everything's been removed. Poof! And do we want to continue? Nobody can access. Well, let's give one user the ability to access. Let's add in the user Bill. Click on OK. So Bill is the only person who can access the test file right now. And we'll close out of here. Now, if we want to, we can turn inheritance back on at any point in the future by going back to the file. Or we can also force inheritance to be turned on as well at the folder level. Let's take a look at that. Let's go up to our folder, select the folder, right-click, Properties, go to Security, and then we can force inheritance by going to our Advanced button. And from here, we have an option at the bottom. It says Replace Permissions on all child objects. So the test file within the folders are child objects, and this is basically going to force and turn inheritance back on. And so if we click on this, click on OK, it's going to say, hey, wait a second now, you may have explicitly assigned a permission to a child object, to your test file. And if you turn inheritance on, I'm going to remove all those explicitly defined permissions. Do you want to proceed? Let's say yes, and see what happens. And click on OK. And let's go back to our test file, double click the folder, go to the properties of our file, and let's go to our security tab. So everything has been inherited, inheritance has been turned on, and the user that we had added here has been removed as the dialog box said it would. And if we go to our advanced button, we see that inheritance option is enabled. And so let's close out of here. Okay, now that we've seen how inheritance works, I'd like to point out a couple of gotchas related to assigning allow and deny permissions. So for example, if we select the sales group, we see that sales has inherited the read, execute, and read permission. And if we want to prevent members from the sales group from reading and opening up this file, this test document, we can just explicitly assign the deny permission. But it's a little confusing here. We see we've inherited an allow, and we also have a deny. So which one is going to win out? Well, as a general rule of thumb, your deny will always override an inherited allow and an explicit allow. And we can see this visibly by clicking on the advanced button. And we see from here that sales has deny and sales has allow permission. So it seems like we have a conflict here, but we don't. What happens is that the operating system evaluates denies first. And if the user is a member of sales, the deny is looked at first and the allow is simply ignored. So the buck stops at deny. And we can see this graphically because deny is at the top of the list and is processed first, and this is ignored. So we don't have this read execute permission. And this is where we can potentially get into some trouble here. If we have two groups here and we have a user that's a member of both groups, and one group is set to deny and the other group is set to allow, the deny will take precedence and the user won't be able to get access to the resource because the deny permission is set. Let's take a look at how we do this by closing out of here. And we're going to add in a couple of other groups. So we'll just click on add. We're going to add in the marketing group and click on OK. We're going to add in another group called interns. And I have a user called Judy that's a member of both of these groups. And right now both groups are set to the allow read execute permission. We're going to select interns and choose deny. And if you notice, as soon as I clicked on that, it removed the allow permission, effectively overriding allow. But the problem here is that we might have other users that are a member of both interns and marketing, and we may want to give some users that are a member of marketing the allow permission, but because they also happen to be in the interns group, they won't get permission because this is set to deny. And when we click on the OK button to OK this, we're going to see a dialog box informing us of this. So it's saying, hey, you're setting a deny permission, and denies take precedence. They're going to win out over allow permissions. And that means if you're a member of two groups, one has allow, the other one has deny, deny is going to win out. Do you want to continue? Absolutely. And we can also see this graphically on our settings tab. So let's go back to our properties, security, then we click on advanced, and we can see the security settings, and we see from this dialog box as well that deny once again is at the top of the ladder here. It's taking precedence over the allows. This functionality of having deny taking precedence over allow is by design, but as you see here, we could get into some trouble of inadvertently denying users access to resources that they should have access to. And Windows XP offers a new feature called effective permissions, which is found right here, to allow us to see if a user needs access to this particular resource, will they have permission or will they not have permission? Let's take a look at this. So for example, we have the user Judy that's a member of interns and member of marketing, and if we click on this select button and then enter the name Judy and click on OK, we see that Judy has no permissions. If Judy had a permission, we would see a check mark by the permission that she would have access to. So the effective permissions tab here is basically a permissions calculator. It takes out all the guesswork of trying to determine of all the different deny and allow permissions and all the groups that a user is a member of, whether or not they have permission, number one, and number two, if they do have permission, what level of permissions do they have. Let's add in another user to see how the effective permissions change for a user that does have access. Let's try the user training, the user account that we use to actually create the test folder. Click on OK. We see that training has the effective permission of full control. Training can do anything to this file anytime, anywhere. So the effective permissions calculator coming to a theater near you. I wish we had this in Windows NT and Windows 2000, but better late than never. Glad we have it in Windows XP. So let's close out of here, and we'll close out of here. So watch out how you assign the deny permission to groups to help avoid conflict. There's another gotcha related to assigning deny permission. I've just drilled into your head that deny always overrides allow. There is one exception to that rule that I'd like to show you now. And 99.99999% of the time, deny is going to override allow unless a folder is inheriting conflicting settings from different parents. Let me show you what I mean by that. So to see this conflict, we're going to have to create some folders. Let's go up one level, start from scratch. We're going to create some folders within folders. And so let's start off by creating a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder Grandparent. And we're going to create a folder within Grandparent, and we'll do that right now. And I'm going to call this folder Parent, and we're going to create another folder inside Parent, and let's do that right now. Just right click, new folder, and I'm going to call this folder Child. So if you notice on the address bar that the child folder is within the parent folder and the parent folder is within the grandparent folder. And due to inheritance, any permissions that are assigned on the grandparent folder will pass down through the parent down to the child. And this is precisely where we can get our conflict. So let's go up a couple levels to the grandparent, and we're going to set a permission on the grandparent. So let's do that by clicking on Properties, go to Security, and from here let's add in a group called, how about our sales group? And we're going to set sales to deny. So we're assigning a explicit deny. Click on Apply, and it's just telling us that same warning that we've seen before. Do we want to continue? Absolutely. Click on OK. And now within Grandparent, let's go to our parent folder. Right click, choose Properties. We're going to go to our Security tab, and we're going to select Sales, and we're going to choose Allow for Sales. Click on Apply. Click on OK. And let's see the result of that combination of the allow on the deny on the grandparent and the allow on the parent on the child. So let's double click on here, select Child, right click, Properties, and click on Security. and click on Sales. So we see here on the right hand side an inherited allow and an inherited deny for these permissions. And let's see how they're sorted out by clicking on the Advanced button. Well, isn't this interesting? We see that the sales with the allow is at the top of the food chain and sales with the deny is below that. And that means that this allow will be evaluated first, and the end result of that is that members of the sales group will be allowed access to this folder called child and anything else within this folder here. And we can put this to test and see if that's really the case by using our Effective Permissions tab. I have a user called Tim that's a member of the sales group, so let's select Tim, and we'll see if Tim is assigned a permission or not. So let's click on OK. And Tim indeed does have permission because Tim is a member of the sales group, and more importantly, because the allow is evaluated first. The reason for this is that the setting inherited from the parent that's closest to the object that you're looking at, the object being the file of the folder, will take precedence. So because we had set the allow permission on the folder called parent, that parent folder is closer to the child folder, and because that parent folder is closer, the allow settings take precedence. So this is the only instance in which an allow will override a deny. Other than that, 99.9999% of the time, deny is always going to take precedence over an allow permission. Let's close out of here and look at how we can take ownership of a file or folder. So let's say that we've got two users, Judy and Tim, that both share the same computer. And Judy has gone on vacation, and Tim needs to make a change to a file that Judy had created, but Tim only has read and execute permission to that file. Well, what Tim can do is either call the administrator and have the administrator change the permission to allow Tim access to the file, or have the administrator give Tim the modify permission so Tim can change the permissions himself. Let's see how this looks by taking a look at a file. So let's go into Judy's folder here, and let's go to the properties of Judy's file here that we need to allow Tim access to so he can make some changes. So we're going to go to the Security tab, and because Tim is a regular user, Tim has the read and execute permission, but Tim can't modify the file. So what we can do as an administrator is click on the Advanced button, and then click on Add, and add in the user, say for example Tim, and then click on OK. And then assign Tim the take ownership permission, and with that permission, let's close out of here. What Tim would do is log on to the computer, go to the security settings dialog box that we're at right now, and then click on the Owner tab. From here, Tim would be listed, and Tim would select himself, click on OK, and then the owner changes from Judy to Tim. And once Tim is the owner, Tim could then select himself and then add the additional permissions that he would need to actually make changes to the file, and then he would be good to go. So let's close out of here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this video. Let's do a quick recap of the points we covered. We started off by seeing how we can create shared folders locally. Then we saw how we can use our computer management console to connect to another computer and create shares on that computer. And we saw the different share permissions we can set. But we saw it's best practice to set our permissions by using the NTFS permissions rather than share permissions to help avoid conflicts between the two sets of permissions. And then we saw how inheritance automatically applies permissions from the parent down to the child, and how to manually assign permissions by using users and groups and assigning the allow and deny permissions, and how to use the effective permissions calculator to find out exactly what permission a user has to that file or folder. And then we finished off our talk here by seeing how to allow a person to take ownership of a file or folder if they've been assigned the take ownership permission. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this video has been informative for you, And I'd like to thank you for viewing.